Good morning, everyone, and happy Tuesday. Today, with everything going on, there's a lot of things that I could talk about, but I'm going to try to stick to fairly normal programming, just for a sense of normalcy for everybody. So I actually wanted to talk about epilepsy today because I've had a couple of clients who have dogs with seizures, and with the whole mini pandemic that went on with the flea and tick collars causing seizures in perfectly healthy dogs, I just wanted to educate a little bit about epilepsy and seizures. So epilepsy is actually a class of disorders. Morning, Monica. And it's basically a sudden and repeated seizure, so typically it does have to happen more than once. It's an uncontrolled burst of electrical activity in the brain, and clinically it has a repetitive pattern. So typically, if they have a specific type of seizure, they're going to repeat that specific type of seizure again rather than have a less intense or more intense seizure. And we're going to go over the types. But first, it's more common in dogs than in cats. It's typically during sleep or while they're resting, as well as night and early in the morning. So it's not often that we see it if they do actually have epilepsy, which is why, unless it happens in broad daylight, it's kind of hard for us to know unless they sleep on the bed with us, and then we can feel it. But they can last anywhere between 5 seconds and a whole minute, which is actually quite a long time. And sometimes they can actually last several minutes. And I have seen this happen, not in person, but I've seen lots of videos of dogs having seizures, and some of them can be quite violent. And we're going to go into the types of seizures after this. Seizures can be with or without the loss of consciousness, so sometimes they do actually pass out when they're having a seizure. And typically they're also twitching, and occasionally they do release their bladder, so do be wary of that. They can often be confused and disoriented up to 24 hours after the seizure, which if they're recurring every day, they're going to be consistently disoriented and confused. So if you're noticing this and you think your dog has a neurological issue, please go to the vet and get it checked. The most common type of seizure is a grand mal seizure, which can last seconds to minutes, so it's usually one of the longer ones. It is the entire body, so it's not just one part like a leg. It does include the loss of consciousness. There are a lot of convulsions, and it's basically abnormal electrical pulses in the brain. So I could do a video on neurons, and maybe I will, but basically the brain sends electrical impulses and it's received somewhere else. So if it's pulsing at its regular rhythm, the brain is functioning normally. If it's pulsing maybe too fast or too close together, then that could result in a seizure. The second type is a focal seizure, also called a partial seizure, and these are typically only a few seconds long. This is an abnormal electricity in one side of the brain, so it's not the whole body this time. And it can also be one area of the body. So for example, both the back legs but not the front legs, or the left side of the body but not the right side of the body. The next type of seizure is a general seizure. It's the most common one, lasts a couple seconds, and it's one part of the body, again, not the whole thing. Not sure why they're separate, but they listed them as separate. The last kind is a complex partial seizure, which is an unusual behavioral repetition with each seizure. So some dogs can all of a sudden get really aggressive or defensive when they have their seizure. So if they're exhibiting strange behavior for a minute or two and then they flick back to normal, that could be something neurological going on with their brain. And again, you can go get it checked. Symptoms include anorexia, lethargy, unusual behavior, confusion, muscle twitching, drooling, foaming at the mouth, and stiff limbs. There was I think it was the flea and tick. I watched a couple of videos about that, and it was causing severe seizures in completely healthy dogs, and some of the seizures lasted 5-6 minutes. So in this case, you're looking more at a grand mal seizure where it's the entire body, and sometimes they twitch so hard that they can injure themselves. So the best thing you can do is not get in their way when they're twitching, but try and pad, if they're going to run into a wall or something like that while they're twitching, pad the wall so they're safer and they're not going to hurt themselves by running into something. But the best we can do is, for seizures, is try to get a brain scan if possible. There's a lot of neurological specialists when it comes to pets, because they can get a lot of brain conditions just like we can. So it's important that you look into it. Learning how to regulate their brain function is really important. Typically this is done with medication, and I'm sure there are other ways to do it, but I'm not quite educated enough for that. There are a couple of causes of seizures beyond the obvious flea and tick, an physical injury, something like that. But they're classified into 2 different types, and Monica, I'll answer your question in just 1 sec. So the first type is a structural seizure, meaning that there's a cause within the brain. So either something's wrong with the chemistry of the brain, there was a physical injury to the brain. That's pretty much the only 2. There can also be genetic structural issues. So if your pet comes from a line of dogs or cats that has a history of neurological issues, it's quite possible that they could develop seizures at some point in their life. So it's something to just keep an eye on up until you start to notice some of those symptoms that I mentioned. The second type is idiopathic, meaning there's no specific cause in the body. It's just something that happens, which I think is the more unfortunate type, because there's nothing that can be physically fixed in the body. So there's not much to be done if your dog does have seizures other than protect them. And Monica says, my Coco had Cushing's disease with a tumor on her pineal gland. At the end, she had 3 seizures in 30 minutes. Was caused from the tumor. Her bowels and anal glands let go. Was just awful to watch her go through that. She died shortly after that. It's absolutely heartbreaking to watch. If you've never seen an animal have seizures before, it's similar to watching a child have seizures, because all of a sudden there's this immediate feeling of helplessness and there's nothing that you can do. And I had a friend whose dog was actually one of the flea and tick dogs that I worked on that was poisoned by the topical flea and tick, and completely healthy 2.5-year-old dog. And now she has a muscle disorder because of that. So she has difficulty coordinating her limbs, and she's only 2.5. And it absolutely breaks my heart because she was completely healthy before. But tumors are another, that would be classified as a structural because there's something physically wrong. If some tumors can be removed, but it entirely depends on where it is and the size of it and how fast it's growing. Most people will not pay to have a brain tumor removed from their dog because it is very expensive. The recovery is quite extensive, and oftentimes the dog is not the same after that. So there's not much else to say about it. It's really, really heartbreaking. But thank you for sharing your story, Monica. That's all I have to say about that. I did have to cancel my April equine acupressure class because of everything that's going on. But as of this morning, I was sending an email to my host this morning. That's why this video is late. I have a backup, a date for the equine class and a backup date, as well as a backup date for the June class in case this keeps going on longer. So both species will get their class this year. Not to worry about that. Monica says they couldn't do surgery as it was too close to her brain. Yeah, it's very rare that they'll get a tumor away from the brain that's affecting it directly, unless it's somewhere in the heart area. But it's really hard once they get tumors because there's not a whole lot we can do other than try and remove them. And if we can't remove them, there's not really much we can do. But I'm glad she had a long, happy life with you, Monica. I hope you all have a fabulous rest of your day. And stay tuned. I'm going to do some Instagram stuff later this week. And I hope you all have a fabulous rest of your week. Remember to stay inside, stay home if at all possible. Play with your dogs and cats. They're very happy for you to be home. And be safe. Talk soon.